Finesse2Tymes finally broke his silence on the BBL rumors that had been following him around the internet for over 2 years. And when he did, he made one thing crystal clear. He ain't ashamed of nothing. But that was just the beginning. Because at the same damn time that the internet was dissecting his body, Finesse was fighting a different battle behind the scenes. A battle that had nothing to do with surgery and everything to do with money, power, and a contract he describes as the worst deal he ever signed in his life. By the time Prince Jr. decided to use that surgery story as a weapon against him publicly, Finesse had already been locked in a quiet war with the Mob Ties label for months. A war that finally exploded all over social media for the whole world to see. What you're about to hear is the full story. The come-up, the contract, the fallout, and the moment a label boss tried to embarrass his own artist to avoid a conversation about money. Stay with us until the end because this story goes way deeper than a BBL. Finesse2Tymes is a rapper out of Memphis, Tennessee, best known for his raw street delivery, his convicted felony narrative, and his 2022 track Backend, a record that would eventually go gold and put him on the map for real. But none of that happened overnight, and none of it happened easy. He was born Mario Ransom in Memphis, Tennessee, and grew up surrounded by the kind of environment that either breaks a person or hardens him for life. Memphis has one of the highest violent crime rates in the entire country, and neighborhoods Finesse came up in were not exceptions to that rule. You either got in line with what was happening around you, or you got ran over by it. Growing up, Finesse wasn't insulated from any of it. The streets were the curriculum, and the lessons came hard and fast. By the time he was a young man, he had already accumulated a record that would follow him into adulthood. A pattern that was going to cost him years of his life before he ever saw the inside of a recording studio with any real intention behind it. Music was always something he connected with, but for a long time, the streets took priority. Memphis has produced some of the most rawly authentic voices in hip-hop history. 36 Mafia, Young Dolph, Yodi, and Finesse grew up surrounded by that legacy. That city doesn't produce soft artists. It produces people who rap exactly the way they live. And Finesse was no different. What makes his story interesting, though, is that his entry into the music industry didn't come from a smooth, calculated pivot. It came from circumstances that forced him to take music seriously as a survival tool rather than just a hobby. Section 3. Early struggles/formative events. He served time behind federal walls. And by his own account, those years locked up shaped everything about how he moved when he got out. Prison in Memphis isn't just physical confinement. It's a full immersion into a social ecosystem where reputation and respect are the only currencies that matter. And Finesse, by all accounts, carried himself in a way that earned both. When he got out, he came back with something to prove and an urgency that you can hear on every single record he's made since. There's a desperation in his music that doesn't sound manufactured. It sounds like a man who genuinely understands that time is not guaranteed, that second chances don't always come, and that the window to make something out of himself was already smaller than most people's. By the time it opened, that's the version of Finesse that Prince Jr. found when he brought him into Mob Ties. A hungry, freshly released convict from Memphis with raw talent, a real street following, and absolutely no leverage in a business negotiation. At the time, the deal probably looked like a blessing. Mob Ties had distribution through Atlantic Records, a co-sign from Moneybagg Yo's Bread Gang Entertainment, and the Prince name, a name that in certain lanes of hip-hop carries serious historical weight. Prince Sr. built Rap-A-Lot Records from nothing and turned it into one of the most respected independent labels in the game. His son was positioning Mob Ties as a continuation of that legacy. For a rapper fresh out of prison with no industry connections and no infrastructure, signing with Mob Ties made sense on paper. The problem, as Finesse would learn, was that what looks like opportunity on the surface can look a lot more like a cage from the inside. In 2022, Finesse2Tymes dropped Backend, and the record moved differently than anything coming out of Memphis at that moment. It wasn't polished. It wasn't overproduced. It was grimy and direct in that specific Memphis way that listeners who know the city immediately recognized as authentic. The streets ran it up. The internet picked it up. And before long, Backend was crossing demographics and reaching audiences that Finesse probably never expected to reach. The record eventually earned a gold certification from the RIA. For a rapper who was doing time not long before that, it was a legitimate achievement that couldn't be argued with. Gold plaques don't lie. Off the strength of that momentum, Finesse started building a visible presence. He was doing shows, performing at major festivals, including the Beat Street Music Festival in 2023, and giving interviews that let people see the full person behind the music. He was charismatic, unfiltered, and clearly connected with his audience in a way that went beyond just the records. He wasn't just a one-on rapper either. His catalog under Mob Ties was growing, and his name recognition was extending beyond just the core Memphis base. He was becoming a genuine regional figure with crossover potential, and the numbers backed that up. On the surface, everything looked like it was working. But behind the scenes, the relationship between Finesse and Mob Ties was already beginning to show cracks that would eventually split wide open. Before we get to the full contract blow-up with Jay Prince Jr., we need to talk about the surgery situation, because it's directly connected to how that beef eventually played out in public. November of 2023. Finesse is in a season of his life that, by his own account, was complicated. Multiple relationships, drama with people he was close to, and apparently a recovery period that he was trying to keep private. That's when one of his former girlfriends decided to put his business in the street. She posted on her Instagram story calling Finesse out, claiming he was on downtime because he had gotten either a BBL or liposuction. She was clearly going through something emotionally, and she used what she knew about his personal life as ammunition in whatever conflict was happening between them in the streets. That kind of thing is considered a violation. You don't put a man's personal medical decisions on blast to score points in an argument. That's a different kind of move. But here's what made Finesse different from a lot of rappers who had denied everything and gone into defensive mode. He didn't run from it. He got on Facebook and addressed it directly. His response was calm, confident, and honest. Lipo and BBL, two different things. He clarified he didn't treat it like a scandal. He didn't act embarrassed. And then he said something that told you everything you need to know about where his head was at. When I pop out, they're going to call me Finesse2Tymes. That a man who is genuinely comfortable with himself, not performing confidence, actually having it. Now, for context, liposuction is not some fringe procedure. Rappers have been getting body work done for years. Cardi B has talked openly about her lipo. Kanye West admitted to getting work done. The idea that a male rapper getting a cosmetic procedure is some kind of disqualifying scandal says more about the people making noise about it than it does about Finesse. But in hip-hop culture, certain circles still use cosmetic surgery as a weapon against men's credibility. And that's exactly what Jay Prince Jr. would weaponize later when the contract situation exploded. The surgery story wasn't done following Finesse around in early 2026 when he got into a separate spat with Gorilla's sister. She also brought it up unprompted, referencing his tummy tuck and called him out on his body. Multiple people and multiple beefs going back to the same medical procedure tells you that his opponents had clearly filed it away as a go-to attack. What none of them counted on was Fineste's response being consistent every single time. Ownership. He accepted it, moved past it, and kept going. That's actually harder than denying it. By 2024, Finesse2Tymes had established himself. He was doing press at Sirius XM. His social media presence was growing. He had real commercial traction. And that's exactly when the frustration with Mob Ties started becoming impossible to ignore. Not just money, though money was clearly a part of it, but access to the rooms, the conversations, the relationships, and the opportunities that a major distribution deal is supposed to unlock. Think about what the Mob Ties setup was supposed to provide on paper. A deal with Atlantic Records means you're sitting inside one of the biggest music companies in the world. Atlantic has historically been home to some of the biggest names in hip-hop and R&B. When you have distribution through Atlantic, doors are supposed to open. Fineste's position was that those doors were not opening for him. That people connected to Mob Ties with far less on their resume. No hits, no plaques, no track record. Were somehow getting into spaces that he with a gold record and a growing fan base was being blocked out of. That kind of situation is maddening for any artist. But for someone like Finesse, who had sacrificed years of his life, who had done real time, who had earned his reputation the hard way, it wasn't just frustrating. It felt like betrayal. And then the tone changed. What started as private frustration became a very public demand. January of 2026, Finesse2Tymes got on social media and stopped being diplomatic, addressing Jay Prince Jr. directly. He laid out what he wanted in plain language. He said he wanted out of mob ties. He wasn't angry. He wasn't threatening. He was just done. His exact words were, "Let me go, Junior. We done already made all the money we can make. I don't want to go to another label with you. I love you, but I no longer want to be mob ties business-wise." That statement was significant for a few reasons. First, he wasn't burning the bridge personally. He specifically said he loved Jay Prince Jr. and separated the personal relationship from the business. Second, by making it public, he was bypassing whatever private channels had clearly not been working. He was taking it to the core of public opinion because that was the only leverage he had. And then the frustration deepened. Months passed. Nothing changed. By March of 2026, Finesse was done being measured about it. In a lengthy video posted to social media, he went further than he had ever gone publicly. He called the mob ties deal the worst contract he had ever signed. He said he should have gone directly to Atlantic without a middleman. He watched artists with no proven track record access opportunities he was supposed to have, and he couldn't make sense of it. He had gold plaques. He had a real fan base. He had done the work and still nothing. That's when he used the word slavery. Now, that's a heavy word, but the context matters. He wasn't making a casual comparison to history. He was describing the specific feeling of being contractually bound to an agreement that benefits the other party while you sit and watch your career stall, unable to leave and unable to move. That feeling of having no agency, no exit, and no financial equity in something you built with your own name and talent. He ended the rant the same way he ended most of them, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. We live and we learn. He said that line tells you a lot about where Finesse actually is mentally. He's not broken. He's just tired being held still. Here's where the story shifts from a business dispute into something that reveals a lot about both men's character. Jay Prince Jr. finally responded to months of public pressure, and the response had nothing to do with the contract. Instead of addressing the money, instead of addressing the access issue, instead of explaining why a gold-certified artist can't get into rooms at a label that has Atlantic distribution, instead of any of that, he went on Instagram and mocked Finesse for getting liposuction in a tummy tuck. His post read, "Not a knicker that got lipo his titties done and a tummy tuck talking about some hair. I think you need to go back. That bad _energy ain't work." Read that carefully. That is the CEO of a record label publicly attacking one of his own artists for having cosmetic surgery, not defending the business, not presenting his side of the financial situation, not showing receipts. Just mockery. Personal petty mockery aimed directly at something Finesse had already addressed, owned, and moved past 2 years prior. That's the response of someone who doesn't have a business argument to make. When you can't defend the deal, you attack the person. And what made the whole thing worse was the specific nature of the attack. Jay Prince Jr., representing a label called Mob Ties, a name built on the idea of street credibility and loyalty, chose to use a man's personal body choices as a weapon. In the streets, that's considered soft. You don't air a man's personal information to win a business argument. That's not how loyalty works. Finesse's response was short and deadly precise. He got in the comments and said, "The difference between you and me is I accept who I am. You don't." That one line did more damage than any song could have, and the fans agreed. The comment section was not with Jay Prince Jr. People were asking why he wouldn't just release Finesse if things were so bad between them. One person wrote, "Just let him out his contract. That easy. Things can be prevented. Or do you need him?" Another said, "Let damn man out his deal since y'all so up and living like the MO. When your own move meant to embarrass someone turns into a PR loss for you, you've lost the moment." The Finesse2Tymes and Jay Prince Jr. Situation isn't just about one rapper and one label. It's a version of a story that has played out hundreds of times in hip-hop, and it almost always follows the same pattern. An artist with raw talent and no leverage signs a deal that looks like an opportunity. The deal benefits the label far more than it benefits the artist. The artist grows, builds a fan base, earns commercial recognition, and then looks around to find that the doors the deal was supposed to open are still closed. The money is not right, the access is not right, and the contract won't let them leave. It happened to TDK Chili. It happened to Too Short early in his career. It happened to artists on every level of the industry, from independent labels to the majors. The specific details change, but the architecture stays the same. What's different about the Finesse situation is the transparency. He didn't lawyer up quietly. He didn't hint at it in interviews with careful, guarded language. He got on social media and told the truth directly to the person he was in business with an audience watching. That takes a certain kind of boldness. And it also reflects a real calculation. When you have no legal leverage, sometimes public pressure is the only tool available. And the surgery angle, it was never really about surgery. The fact that Jay Prince Jr. reached for that instead of a business. Response tells you everything about who had the stronger argument in this dispute. You don't attack a man's body when you have receipts. You pull up the receipts. He pulled up a personal jab that Finesse had already addressed, owned, and left in 2023. And Finesse, unbothered, consistent, self-accepting, handled it the same way he handled it the first time, with ownership. As of right now, Finesse2Tymes is still signed to Mob Ties. The contract hasn't been dissolved. The album, he said, he didn't want to make any more, hasn't come out, and the public back and forth between him and Drince Jr. continues to play out in comment sections and on Instagram stories, one post at a time. But what this whole story ultimately reveals is something worth paying attention to, whether you're a fan of Finesse or not. This is a man who came out of the federal system with nothing but a name and a hunger. He built that into a gold record. He built that into festival shows and Sirius XM press runs, and a fan base that genuinely rides for him. He got body work done, and owned it publicly in a culture that tries to shame men for it. He called out his label by name when he felt wronged without hiding behind vague complaints. And when the person he was in business with tried to use his most personal choices against him in front of the world, he responded with 4 words that cut straight through the noise. I accept who I am. That's either the most unbothered line in this whole story, or it's the most strategically devastating thing he could have said. Either way, it landed. The Mob Ties situation is still unresolved. The contract question still has no public answer. The rooms Finesse says he's been locked out of are still closed. And until that changes, you can expect him to keep talking loud, direct, and unfiltered. Because at this point, that's the only card he has left to play. Whether that's enough to get him free, only time will tell. But one thing is clear. Finesse2Tymes is not going quietly. And in a game where most artists fold the moment the label applies pressure, that alone says